Federal troops are now patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C., deployed by President Trump, who has taken over the city's police force to combat crime.
And he says a federal takeover of the NYPD may be next. So how likely is that? More importantly, does he have the authority to do it? Joining us this morning to break it all down is presidential historian Dan Cassino. So Dan, great to see you again on an important topic here.
Thanks for having me.
And, I got a lot of questions about this, right? President Trump has deployed National Guard troops to cities before. But what he's doing now in D.C. is different. And there's a reason for it, right? Because there's a whole charter that goes on between the federal government and the D.C. police. Can you kind of lay this out?
Absolutely. So remember, Washington, D.C. is not a state. It is actually a product entirely of the federal government. And that gives the president a lot more power over the police force and over the government of Washington, D.C. Than he has anywhere else. So Washington, D.C., basically, he can treat it all as if it's kind of federal property. And as a result, he's allowed to send in basically whoever he wants for up to 2 days with no oversight and up to 30 days. And all he has to do is inform Congress of that. So he has a lot more power there than he has anywhere else. Under the system of federalism we have, law enforcement is really something that's supposed to be left up to the states. It's the president can't do the same sort of thing in other states, although certainly there is things he can do if he wanted to send troops into New York.
But has the president ever done something like this before?
Certainly, we've seen presidents put out troops into Washington, D.C. In order to quell protests in Washington, D.C., in order to deal with specific problems there. Nothing like this, where there's no crisis in Washington, D.C., there's nothing going on, there's no particular reason why you would have to send troops, other than the president believes erroneously that crime is up.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying there's a crisis, right? He said there's a crisis, that there's a homeless problem, that there's drug issues on the street and a gang problem. But when he was holding his press conference, Dan, he talked about doing this in other cities, New York, L.A., for example. And we did see the National Guard be deployed in L.A. during some protests that were taking place because of what was going on with ICE. That's different than a takeover of the police. Can you explain?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the reasons that the president is allowed to send in federal forces or even troops is in order to protect federal workers or protect federal property. And that's what's going on in L.A. Basically, he sent in ICE. There was large protests against the ICE presence and Border Patrol presence in Los Angeles. And as a result, he was able to say, oh, well, I need to send in the National Guard in order to protect those ICE troops. So basically, we've now created a problem because the federal workers, he says, are not able to do their job properly. And so we can send in troops to cover them. In 2020, we saw he actually sent in federal troops in cities that had large protests like Portland, because he said, oh, they're threatening business, they're threatening federal buildings, and so we can have the troops there. The troops cannot, however, do law enforcement. That's banned by the Posse Comitatus Act, so they can't even detain people. There's real limits on what they can do under those functions.
So is basically what the president's doing in D.C. kind of like what Governor Hochul did when she deployed the National Guard here to the city to drive down crime on the subway?
Well, it's very different when the governor does it, because the governor, there's no federalism issues there. The governor can send in the National Guard whenever she wants, for whatever reason she wants, within her own state. But yeah, that's what Trump is claiming. He needs to have a surge of troops in order to drive down the crime rate. Again, the issue here is he says there's a crime problem. There actually has not been a surge in crime. He claims crime is up hundreds of percent. And of course, crime is actually down in Washington, D.C., as it is pretty much around the country.
Yes, the mayor had said.
Right, they've been touting those numbers as well. But so what do they have the authority to do in D.C., right? Can you kind of explain to me, if the president says, okay, I have the ability to take over the police department, so what are you going to see on the streets of D.C. versus, in New York if it were to happen here? Can the National Guard or the DEA or the FBI, can they conduct things like homeless sweeps or drug raids?
There are absolutely certain things they can do. So we're talking about law enforcement things like drug raids. That's a federal crime. The FBI can always come in and do that. The group that actually has the most power to come into New York or anywhere else is the Border Patrol. Border Patrol has authority anytime you're within 100 miles of the border, which is basically everywhere. So New York is within 100 miles of a water border, and as a result, they can send the Border Patrol in without any real justification for it. But in terms of a takeover of the city government, no, there's no law that would allow them to do that. There's no law that allows them to send troops or federal or National Guard without the governor's approval.
So if he tried it, it's a no before it even, because the mayor is like, well, that won't happen here.
Right. Well, the problem with this administration is, yes, you can say, yeah, legally he can't do it. That said, the president could come up with some justification and go ahead and do it anyway. Under our constitutional system, if he does something that's illegal, the only thing we can do about it is the Congress can impeach and remove him, and that's really a dead threat at this point. There's no way that's going to happen. So there's not really any ramifications if he does something that is illegal, except maybe the troops will say no. I'm not clear if that's actually likely to happen.
Okay. Well, this federal takeover in D.C. is supposed to last 30 days, but can the president actually extend that?
Yeah, so if he has to, after 30 days, he has to get some degree of approval from Congress. However, there's nothing to stop him from stopping that deployment in Washington, D.C., and then starting it up again immediately. Again, these rules were basically designed with the idea that the president would have to work with Congress, and if the president did this sort of thing, he would be poisoning his relationship with Congress, and as a result, no president would ever do it. This president, however, is not terribly concerned with actually passing laws through Congress, so it doesn't really, those restrictions don't really apply to him very much.
All very interesting. What was the act you said? The what?
The Posse Comitatus
Dan,
Act.
you are such a. Where do you store all this in your brain? It's amazing. This is why you're the historian and we're not. Great stuff. Thank you for laying it all out and explaining it.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.